Hello, I'm Gail McGreevy, and welcome to this episode of our podcast, Probation Matters. I'm joined today by Michael McCracken, Principal Psychologist for Probation, to mark World Mental Health Day, which occurs on October the 10th. So today we're going to talk a little bit about mental health, why it's important to us in probation. So Michael, maybe just to start with, mental health has recently topped the list of the biggest health concerns globally, according to Ipsos. Why is that? Why is that the case?
It's a very good question, and I think that the COVID pandemic has certainly had something to do with that. But even prior to that, there has been a shift in how we as society have been thinking about mental health. Going back 10 or 15 years, we have started to think a lot more about the parity of esteem. What we mean by that is really about equality in how we think about mental health and physical health care. It's essentially about how those are valued in our society. Historically, there has been a gap. The medical model has traditionally focused on the physical, and a research gap has been identified in terms of the resources that were going into understanding mental health problems. There were service and treatment gaps, and I think often as well a gap in the quality of care that people were receiving if they have mental health problems. There were in fact many people with common mental health problems that were receiving no treatment at all. And I think it's also true to say that physical and mental health are inextricably linked, and I think we understand that now much better than before. So there's been a big move towards equal access for effective, safe care, equal effort to improving the quality of care, and that resources in healthcare should be allocated on the basis and commensurate with need. So we're working towards this place of equal status within healthcare, education, and in practice. Now, I think what the COVID-19 highlighted was significant inequality within our society as well, because COVID-19 affected different groups. People, more marginalised groups, were more deeply affected by it than others. It certainly had a big impact on mental health. I think the uncertainty of the time, jobs were uncertain, the social isolation had a significant impact on how we were functioning. Our own health minister at the time, Robin Swan, developed a COVID-19 mental health response plan, as did many other societies. We now have our mental health champion in Northern Ireland, Professor Siobhan O'Neill. And so it's quite clear that it's just been more and more coming to the forefront of our thinking.
And more people are talking about it. Alistair Campbell, who does a lot of work for mental health, former advisor to Tony Blair, but now very focused on mental health, talks about changing the lens in terms of mental health. And he coined an interesting phrase. He talked about everyone has mental health. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And that's an interesting way of, I think, looking at it and trying to destigmatise the conversation around mental health. So we need to talk more about it. We need to raise awareness. But is there a risk in doing that? How safe do you think people feel talking about their mental health today?
I think we have to say that it is okay not to be okay. We need to talk about it. I don't think there's any danger in talking about it. I think it should remain part of our everyday conversations. I think it's quite right that we have open dialogue about life's challenges. You know, mental health, mental ill health, it has no boundaries regarding age, gender, socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity. It's common to the lives of any of us. None of us are immune to it. I think it's really important that talking about mental health should be part of our everyday conversation. It should remain part of that conversation. We should have open dialogue about life's challenges. Reducing the stigma is really helped by talking about things, by educating, by promoting good mental health, by parity of esteem.
And that's absolutely right. 20 years ago when I had my daughter, people talked about postnatal depression, but didn't talk about, for example, postnatal anxiety. And there we saw Claire Sugden, former Justice Minister, talking about her own personal experience and her personal journey through postnatal anxiety. And those stories, I suppose, again, 15, 20 years ago when you looked locally, there weren't many people telling their stories about mental health. Now you've got people like Lindsay Robinson, blogger and campaigner on mental health issues, Jonathan McCambridge, others telling their stories and giving a bit of hope. They're still there, they're still dealing with issues, but they're managing to overcome those issues. How important is that message of hope?
It's absolutely vital. Actually, it's very brave to be the first people to be able to take that step and start talking about these things. I think in the Olympics this year, there has been a big focus on mental health. We have world-class athletes, who look to the rest of us that they have absolutely got everything sorted. But they're able to now speak more openly about the struggles that they have. And some have been through serious mental health difficulties and challenges. And it provides that sense of universality. I'm not alone, or you're not alone in experiencing these things, but actually it's something which is common to all of us as human beings.
And Michael, if somebody is experiencing some form of poor mental health at the moment, things don't feel right. They can't put their finger on it maybe, but something just doesn't feel right. They're not sure what it is. It's maybe not anxiety or depression, but they don't feel right. Their mood is low. What type of things can people do? What's the best thing to do in terms of trying to seek help, trying to move on?
We all have times when we feel down, when we feel stressed, perhaps frightened. And most of the time those feelings pass, but sometimes they develop into a more lasting problem. And it could be anxiety or a depression, or it could be a more serious mental illness that impacts on our daily lives. And there's all kinds of reasons why we could be experiencing those things. There could be adverse childhood experiences that we have in our background. There could be discrimination that we have faced. There could be adult trauma that has gone on. But in truth, mental health problems like that can happen to anybody. None of us are immune. I think one of the best things that we can do is to seek support from our networks, those good people that we have around us that we can turn to, professional services, our GP, there are helplines, our colleagues that we can turn to. Those are vital. People that have good support around them are able to overcome these difficulties much more easily. However, one thing I will say, in Northern Ireland, we do have high rates of mental ill health. And in fact, 1 in 5 people in Northern Ireland reports that they feel lonely. And one of the things that we can do as a society, what we can do as individuals, is look out for those people. Reach out to the person that maybe does seem to be a little bit on their own or a little bit isolated, maybe doesn't get many visitors, or maybe the person that not as many people talk to at work, and try and connect. Relating is healing.
That's a really important message. And I suppose COVID brought that into sharp focus, but so did things like hybrid working and maybe that lack of connectedness with other people, that piece around just being isolated and just not taken for granted that people want to be alone and reaching out and trying to have those connections and practical ways of doing that. I know you're very interested and have lots of hobbies yourself, and that's an important way of just keeping the mood high and keeping relationships going with other people. That's all really important. Sometimes just reaching out to another person can provide some help, and just having other things in your life and other outlets are important as well. How important have you personally found that?
Do you know something? I'm very, very fortunate, as you say, in terms of hobbies and interests outside of work. The way I think of my hobby is mountaineering and rock climbing, and I am part of Belfast Climbing Club. Whenever I find this hobby and like-minded people who also enjoy this completely bonkers thing that we do, I felt like I found my tribe and had that sense of belonging. So, to me, it's more than a sport or a pastime. It's part of my identity, and it really connects me to something bigger and outside of work, outside of family. And honestly, it's probably the best thing.
And it might not be mountain climbing for everybody, but it's that bit around having an outlet, something that's fun and you can be optimistic about and get you out there meeting other people. All of that's really practically important stuff to do in order to look after yourself and take care of yourself.
Absolutely. And there are a few other simple things that we can do to look after ourselves, which I would encourage anybody to pay attention to. And the first of those is have a good routine. Have a time to get up and have a time to go to bed. It doesn't really matter too much what time those are, but stick to that routine. Also, the benefit of being out in fresh air. Exercise is good, but exercising in the fresh air is even better. Full spectrum sunlight triggers all kinds of responses within our brain chemistry that help us to feel good. Just getting out and breathing and being in nature is a brilliant antidote for mental stress and so on. So I'd encourage anybody to be able to try and fit some outdoor time into their lives. One of the other things that I have found incredibly beneficial for myself was I used to get quite low in the winter. So we have the shorter days, we have less daylight, and sometimes you're coming to work in the dark and you're going home in the dark. But just getting time to get out to walk the dog, even if it's just for 15-20 minutes at the start of the day and the end of the day, actually has reaped great benefits.
And good sleep, you talked about, good routine. Good sleep's really important. If you're not sleeping or you have disturbed sleep, that can have a real impact in terms of mood. So good sleep, people talk about good sleep hygiene and getting into good routines about going to bed at the same time and trying to do that to just be refreshed in the day.
And knowing yourself, so noticing if there's any change, what's different, because you might need a very different amount of sleep than I do, for example, but noticing if there's changes, noticing if you're starting to consume more alcohol than you normally would, and notice if you're grumpy or short with people or more irritable, anything like that. Don't be afraid then to have those conversations with others to say, how do you think I am? as a friend. Yeah,
that's important to do. And at the end of this, we'll put out some information around helplines and other information that people can get and access. But within workplaces, how important is it if you are struggling or you're just feeling unwell to reach out in terms of work and access some support and help within the workplace as well?
There are a number of things that we can do. What the pandemic taught us is social isolation really impacts on our mental health. We now work hybrid working, and we, I think for the most part, really enjoy benefits from that. But one thing we need to be careful about is making sure that we don't lose touch with each other. So having anchor days, making sure that you are coming in and connecting with your colleagues and you've got that face-to-face time, I think is something that we can really all do and pay attention to. Equally, speak to your line manager if you're struggling. Sometimes we're struggling in work because of the demands of work simply that are coming along. Sometimes we are struggling at work because of our boundaries are being pushed, or because there's a value clash between what we're doing and what we're being asked to do. So speak to your line manager. We also in PBNI have support from Inspire. We have the group sessions that are organised for teams to avail of, and also we have the individual counselling services available as well. And I would encourage people to avail of those if they are going through difficulties, in addition to GP and your other personal supports and so on.
And I suppose just finally, we're marking World Mental Health Day, which is one day, but this is an ongoing process, looking after yourself, looking after your mental health, looking after your friends and family. This is all year round. This is something we need to be taking cognizance of throughout the year, isn't it really? This is more than one day.
This is every day, absolutely. This is an opportunity now for us to particularly draw attention to this. But this is something that we want to keep as part of our dialogue and our conversation amongst our teams. In our individual supervision, we put well-being at number 1 on the list whenever we're meeting with our line managers to discuss what's happening. And that needs to be meaningful and it needs to be real. But even every day in the office, it's making sure that we're saying hello to each other and how are you?
Michael, it's been really good to talk about this. I think the message is we need to keep on talking to one another. At the end of this podcast, you'll find some information about organisations that can provide help and assistance. Please log on to PBNI's website for further information about all of the services we provide, including services around mental health and well-being. For any other information that you have, there are charities like Mind and Inspire, and we'll provide those details at the end of this podcast. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.